Hey, what's going on, YouTube? Today we're talking the Mossrock Auric. Now, this is one of the most requested topics I get, and specifically, how do you build this thing out to be as strong as possible? Today's video is not for the free-to-play low spender. Today's video is really for those players that are looking to build a Mossrock to be their alliance's, or at least one of their alliance's, rally or garrison pet. Okay, with that in mind, we're going to make several assumptions for the purpose of this video. The first is that you are one of those players looking to use this pet for the rally, for the garrison. All right, the builds I'm going to talk about are not necessarily the best builds for the open field. They're all going to be geared towards that rally garrison fight. All right, the second thing is that you're willing to go all out on this. That means, 3-starring every skill, using as much amber as you have to, etc. And the third assumption we're going to make is that all the stats on your Mossrock are maxed out. That means 321 strength, 304 agility, 347 endurance, and 200 luck. If you have a Mossrock and you're building it out and one of your stats falls off, your build might vary slightly from the builds I'm talking about. With that in mind, let's talk about the Mossrock because it is starting to supplant the Moonbear as the rally garrison pet of choice. The Moonbear is still awfully good. It works with your G3 heroes. It also works with Lei Quan. But it doesn't work with Kuma, and Kuma being so strong, we see the meta starting to shift towards the Mossrock just a bit. Alright, and you probably know, on the Moonbear, if you want to do the most 1v1 damage, the Fierce Attack package is actually better for the Moonbear for that 1v1 fight, which is often extremely important in the Rally Garrison meta. So the first threshold question we have when it comes to the Mossrock, is Fierce Attack still the choice, or do you want to go with the counterstrike package? Now, when we're talking about Fierce Attack, one of the major limiting factors with Fierce Attack is that it only has a base 40% chance to trigger, and it goes off whenever your deputy does their rage skill. 40% isn't great, but there is a good way to improve that, and that's the skill Intense Fierce Attack, which can increase your trigger chance. Now, you see it has a base 12% chance here, but that's not factoring in your luck skill, and obviously this is 2 stars. But this is an important point because the Mossrock has such a poor luck attribute, right? Maximum 200, that's the most you can possibly get for your luck on the Mossrock. The Fierce Attack package is going to be inherently weaker on the Mossrock. And so when we're talking about just maximizing single target DPS, I built out and tested 3 separate builds. The first build is the full counterstrike build. It does not use Fierce Attack at all. It uses both counterstrike and advanced counterstrike, plus your full pet damage package, plus advanced coil. The second package is the Fierce Attack package. It uses both Fierce Attack, Intense Fierce Attack, and Advanced Fierce Attack, plus the pet crit package, plus advanced coil. One of the downsides to using the Fierce Attack package, you are capped on strength skills because you have coil. Obviously, Fatal Bite is just too good to pass up. Then you have Fierce Attack, and so Tooth and Claw gets cut. All right, that's package number 2. Package number 3 is the hybrid package. It uses the talent skill, obviously, to coil. Then the Fierce Attack package, only Fierce Attack and Intense Fierce Attack. Then the Counterstrike package, Counterstrike and Advanced Counterstrike, and finally the Pet Crit package. Now, I built all 3 of these out. I thought these were all interesting builds in order to maximize single target DPS. Okay, and here's the bottom line. They're all extremely close to each other. Now, you might ask, hey, what do the pet calculators say? Well, here's the news flash. There are multiple pet calculators in the game. I'm aware of several, and they don't agree with each other. Now, they're all in the same ballpark. They're all giving you roughly the same numbers of figures, but they're not identical, and in fact, they'll rank these packages slightly different. Now, the reason I'm not too concerned by that is they're all giving me very similar numbers. All 3 of these packages are extremely close to each other when it comes to single target damage, and depending on which version of the calculator you're using, any one of the 3 could be in first place. Okay, what about AoE protection? What about swarm protection? Well, I tested these all against a hypothetical, 3 targets hitting you. And here we have a clear, unequivocal winner. And the winner here is the Counterstrike package. it does substantially more damage than either of the other packages in a swarm protection, or you're getting hit by multiple targets, multiple rallies, etc. And so it is my opinion that because the single target damage is ambiguous and extremely close, and the AoE damage is unequivocal and like a clear runaway winner, that the counterstrike package is the best package for the Mossrock, once again assuming you have everything maxed out to include the stats on the Mossrock. Okay, we've come to the conclusion that the counterstrike package is the best way to build out this pet, but that's not the end of the story, because this pet in particular has a couple of defensive skills that are at least worth considering. The first of those skills is Intense Coil, right? This is the pet shop skill for the Mossrock. Okay, now just as a reminder for the Mossrock, the talent skill Coil kind of does three things, right? The first thing it does is it puts up a reflective shield, and anyone that hits you for 3 seconds takes damage twice from that reflective shield. The first damage is, factored by the talent skill, the star level and your strength. The second damage factor is also determined by the star level of the talent skill, but scales with the infantry HP bonus. All right, so you got damage factor 1, strength determined, damage factor 2, infantry HP bonus. And in case you're wondering, both of these damage factors are affected by the full pet damage package, things like Angry Roar, Fatal Bite, etc. All right. The other thing it does is for those 3 seconds, it gives your Legion an HP boost. All right. Okay. HP boost by itself is an intrinsically good thing. The more HP your unit has, you're going to suffer fewer casualties the higher HP you have. Okay. Now, like I said, that HP bonus is intrinsically good in and of itself, but it has some synergy both with the pet and with Laquan and Kuma, assuming you're using the pet with them. All right. That second damage factor scales with your infantry HP bonus. All right, so if you have Intense Coil, not only is it making your march a little bit more tankier, it also is making your Mossrock do a little bit more damage on the second damage factor for those 3 seconds after it casts its talent skill. All right, so there is a little bit of a damage factor increase with Intense Coil. However, even at 3 stars, even at max endurance, it ends up being not really all that much, right? So the main benefit, at least for the pet on Intense Coil, is just making you more tankier. Yeah, it adds a little DPS, but the DPS, the damage factor increase here, isn't all that significant. Now you have 2 other things that the pet could potentially help you with. And the first is that Kuma's second skill gives him a heal once every 10 seconds in battle. And this heal scales also with the infantry HP bonus. Now, right, 10 seconds in battle, it's sort of disjointed with when the pet does its talent skill. Over a long battle, sometimes this will hit and sometimes it'll miss. All right, so this will help a little bit sometimes over the course of a long battle. It's not a huge factor, but it's not nothing either. The other thing, the more unfortunate thing, is that Laquan's damage factor also scales with the infantry HP bonus. Unfortunately, these are synced up, and they're synced up in a way that the Mossrock's infantry HP boost is almost always going to miss Laquan's damage factor, right? So let's say you have Laquan as the primary, and that's the better scenario for you in terms of syncing up the infantry HP bonus, right? He does his rage skill, and then you pause a second, and then Kuma does his rage skill, and then you pause a second, and then the pet goes off. All right, and remember, and once the pet goes off, you get 3 seconds from the pet's, infantry HP scaling, and that would mean you have to get back to Laquan's rage skill within those 3 seconds to take advantage to sync these up. And most of the time, you're not going to do that. Most of the time, it's going to take a couple more seconds, and so Laquan's rage skill is going to miss the infantry scaling from the Mossrock, and basically they're just not going to help each other. So now that we've examined all the things that Intense Coil is doing, is it worth getting? And my answer is probably not. This is a significant DPS loss, and while it does make your march more survivable, it really only makes your march more survivable for 3 seconds every rage cycle. I mean, that's not nothing, but the DPS loss is more significant here. If you're building a pet, if you're building a Mossrock with the sole goal just to survive, you're not worried at all about winning the trade. You just want to make sure you don't die, you don't get swarmed down or whatever. Intense Coil is very good. But if you're more concerned about winning the trade, I recommend you steer away from intense coil. The second skill, the second defensive skill worth considering is intense counterstrike. And what intense counterstrike does is it gets you a little buff. Basically, whenever you cast counterstrike, this buff lasts for 5 seconds and it decreases the amount of damage you take from enemy war pets. Okay, now you can get up to 5 stacks of this buff. And if you get 5 stacks, you're basically going to decrease the enemy war pet damage by a little bit more than 25%. All right, that is pretty significant. And it's going to depend whether you want to take this based on 2 assumptions. The first assumption is that you're always going to have, 5 stacks of tough pet. You're going to keep it rolling up more or less the entire, rally garrison fight. The second reason you would take this is you expect to fight enemy war pets that are also like maxed out 3-star everything, right? If your enemy's war pets aren't very good, intense counterstrike isn't very good. This is only good when the enemy war pet is like doing damage, on par or greater than the heroes themselves, right? And absolutely at the top end, war pets will do that much damage. So it really is going to come down to what kind of KVKs you're facing. Okay, let's say you're in one of those KVKs, you expect to be in one of those KVKs, you're going to be fighting war pets that are maxed out. Should you take intense counterstrike? We're going to be fighting these high-end pets, and so the other assumption we need to validate in order to take intense counterstrike is this thing going to be up and running more or less the entire battle? Well, we get a stack of this every time we cast counterstrike, and it lasts for 5 seconds. Okay, when do we cast counterstrike? We cast counterstrike 50% of the time we get hit with a normal attack, all right? So intense counterstrike is one of those, it works 100% of the time, 50% of the time. Okay, when do you get hit with a normal attack? You get hit once every round, but for the most part in a rally garrison fight, if you're in a true one-on-one, you're only going to get hit with one normal attack a round, which means every round you got a 50-50 chance of getting the counterstrike off, meaning you 50-50 chance of getting tough pet. So on average, if you're simply in a one-on-one fight, you are not going to get 5 stacks of tough pet most of the fight. Most of the fight, you're going to get either 2 or 3 stacks of tough pet. If you're only getting 2 or 3 stacks, intense counterstrike is not worth it. Okay, are there scenarios when you're getting hit with more than 1 attack per round? Absolutely there are. You could be swarmed, you could be hit with multiple rallies, etc. And so intense counterstrike in those scenarios is very powerful, right? If you're in those scenarios that I talked about, right, you're fighting another very strong war pet and you have tough pet running, most of the fight at 5 stacks, the amount of damage you reduce from the enemy is substantially more than the amount of DPS you lose from your pet. If you don't meet those conditions, if you're not fighting another strong war pet, okay, no big deal. But if you only have 2 or 3 stacks up for most of the fight, intense counterstrike loses you more DPS than it takes away from the enemy. So it really is going to come down to, do I think my rally or do I think my garrison is going to get hit with multiple enemy legions or multiple rallies most of the time or often enough that this is worth it or not. And really, you're going to have to make that judgment call yourself. Okay, let's say you do make that judgment call and you do want intense counterstrike. What should you take off in place of it? Well, it's going to depend on your pet, but once again, let's assume we have everything maxed out. The first place you cut, if you have all stats maxed out, is actually advanced coil. While advanced coil is very good for the first half of the coil damage, it doesn't affect the second half of the coil damage or advanced counterstrike, whereas tooth and claw benefits all 3. So if you have everything maxed out, your strength's higher than your agility anyway, and so tooth and claw will outperform advanced coil. Now here's the deal with that. In that scenario where you have everything maxed out, maxed everything stats, advanced coil does contribute less DPS than tooth and claw, but it's actually kind of close. So if you've already spit the amber and put advanced coil on your pet, I'm not telling you you have to ditch it for tooth and claw. It's close enough that it's not a big deal. And if you don't have every stat maxed, like most of us don't have every stat maxed, it's going to depend on which is stronger, strength or agility. And if your agility, outpaces your strength, advanced coil does pull ahead there. All right, so to sum up, what's my recommendation for the cracked out Mossrock Auroch, assuming you have everything maxed out? Well, obviously you have the talent skill. After that, you have the full pet crit package. Then you have the counterstrike package in terms of counterstrike and advanced counterstrike. Then you have tooth and claw. And finally, you either have advanced coil or intense counterstrike. Intense counterstrike is worth it if you expect to be hit by multiple marches most of the time. If you expect most of the time you're going to be in a one-on-one, go with advanced coil. All right, and hey, that's all I got for you today. And until next time, you stay classy, Belleron.